WisconsinEye's Campaign 2024 programming is sponsored by Wisconsin Counties Association, Nicolet National Bank, Wisconsin Hospital Association, Operating Engineers Local 139, the Wisconsin Realtors Association, the Wisconsin Laborers District Council, and North Central State's Regional Council of Carpenters. To support programs like this, please consider a tax-deductible donation at wiseye.org/donate or by texting WisEye to 44321.
Senator Eric Wimberger of Green Bay is the Republican candidate for the 2nd Senate District. The election is November 5th. Senator Eric Wimberger, welcome to WisconsinEye.
Well, it's good to be here again.
Well, thanks for participating in our candidate interview. I'd like to start by asking you, what is your campaign's key message? Why are you running again for the Senate?
Well, I think it's important to have sound government, balanced budgets, good projections long term, staying out of debt. Just a healthy government that works for people, generally speaking, and stays out of their business, I guess, as much as it can.
So if you are reelected to the Senate, what's an example of a bill that's really a priority for you to introduce?
Sure. Within that framework, I guess I have particular goals. I want to rerun that PFAS bill that I have. There's some work on the Southern Bridge Connector project, and my new area will cover the town of Lawrence, which needs some assistance there. It's a big project for the county in the area, $120 million projected, and I guess with inflation that's going to increase. So we have the money for the bridge now itself, but there's other stuff that goes along with a connector project. So maybe we can phase in or kind of baby step other stuff this election cycle too. And Fox River needs a little bit of help, both at the port of Green Bay with the coal piles, but also some rehabilitation closer to Kaukauna, and I think that would kind of drive some economic change and improvement.
You know that if you come back to the Senate, you're entering during a biennial budget year, and the state is projected to have more than a $3 billion surplus. What would be your top 2 priorities for use of that surplus?
I think it's hard to say at this point. There's been some softening, at least the Fiscal Bureau says there's some softening. So the projections might eat into that existing surplus. It was up to $7 billion, but what had happened was that we spent a lot of money on one-time projects, things that both Democrats and Republicans could agree upon. Paying for infrastructure projects, not so much with bonding, but just a cash thing. That's why we got the Southern Bridge. It's just and the money for PFAS relief. It's just kind of an allocation there. So I would anticipate we'll do some more of those types of things, but I think it's too early to even kind of think about how we might handle a remaining surplus, because depending on whether that softening continues, we might need a little bit of a buffer there.
Some candidates are prioritizing tax cuts or tax reform. Would that be a priority for you in use of the surplus? Oh,
certainly, but you have to, we do have a government, and we need a government for safety and stability and make sure that the trains run on time, sort of thing. So there are needs within the government to make sure that we do, but we always, I don't have some sort of grand vision for people on how I might create a perfect world. It's more like making sure things function right, that there's opportunities for people. And then once we accomplish those things and keep people safe, then, we shouldn't tax as much, I suppose, but I think it's just premature.
What about K-12 education? It's a leading issue for many voters. What are you hearing, and do you have a priority in your campaign for K-12?
Well, we spent $14 billion this last biennium. It's the single largest expense in the budget. And I think we always get into this debate about what is enough funding. And enough is just a comparison between not enough and too much, and nobody ever really dials that in. I wish we would get to a better understanding of what enough means and have some real concrete goals and understanding of how much that sort of thing is going to cost. I think most people, myself included, want to make sure that the schools and children get a good education, that they have the opportunities in the world, that when they get out of high school that they have a certain ability. And that is kind of the concept of equity in education, is that at the end of it all, everyone has a certain level and that they have attained. But I think that debate is probably never going to end about what is enough funding until we kind of dial that in, unfortunately.
You're saying you need more information before you can commit to an increase for schools?
Sure. I would like to see what $14 billion has done in the last 2 years and what exactly an increase would do. For instance, students in Milwaukee get $15,000 plus per student, and none of them can read. But here in Green Bay area, for instance, in Swamico, they're getting the $10,000 or $11,000 per student, and they're all, high achievers. So there's something going on related to funding in a certain way, but also not related to funding in a certain way. And I think we should, as WisconsinEye, kind of figure that out before we get into a vitriolic debate about it.
What about higher education? The universities of Wisconsin system, 4-year colleges, 2-year colleges, technical colleges. What do you see as the future there, and what should the legislature focus on?
Hard to say. I think there's certainly a paradigm shift going on. So you can do a lot of things online. People are starting to realize that a college education is going to get you into debt that sometimes won't translate into a job that will get you out of debt. So I think there's just a transition going on. How that looks, I don't know. We did get some funding to help transition some of the satellite campuses, give those buildings to the county, and maybe they can use those buildings for something county related or locally related. So how that transition goes long term, I guess, is to be seen, but I think people are open-minded to understanding that there is a transition going as to the nature of what is being taught and what institutional needs and brick and mortar needs are going to be going for.
Is that an area that you think could use some additional investment, or you need more information as well?
I think that that's a mixed bag. For instance, at UWGB, there's a new library being built, and that's a need, and so these things, and you want to invest in it. UWGB also has a desire to expand its business and STEM center and create a new structure there. And that's something that would need investment, I think, is a good cause. But to make a blanket assertion that there needs to be more money, that all depends. There may or may not, depending on what the proposal is.
What do you see as the state's largest workforce challenge, and how would you propose addressing it?
Got to make schools teaching things that employers need, and always reevaluate. That's a workforce challenge. There's quality of life. You want people to move here, enjoy the area. So there's a quality of life issue. So you want to make sure to protect the environment, have good things going on. The right investments in infrastructure, like for instance the Southern Bridge Connector, is going to make all that area between Green Bay and Appleton kind of more available and accessible to attract people to the area, because they'll have such an ability for mobility and getting to where they need to getting to go where they need to go in their daily lives. So doing those targeted infrastructure projects, making sure that schools are teaching things that are translating to the job market, are important things for us.
More workforce discussion here. Investments in public and energy infrastructure grow our state's economy. These investments also provide an opportunity to invest in our state's workforce, but currently there are no requirements for hiring local workers. Would you support a state resident hiring requirement for state, local, and utility scale infrastructure investments?
Those things have been kind of tried a lot in the past in different states. You've got an equal protection clause issue and a privileges and immunities clause issue. And those are kind of the primary obstacles. So you do want to help people locally, but if we were able to do that in Wisconsin, then in other states, if they did it would obviously hurt Wisconsinites in trying to achieve those things in other states. So those are those obstacles that are kind of entrenched in case law in the United States Constitution and the 14th Amendment. So perhaps there's some way to get some nibbling around the edges, I suppose, in that regard. But on the whole, just making a discriminatory law saying no one from out of state can work at a particular job is not going to be possible, I don't think.
Employee classification is an issue in the construction industry. Some employers misclassify workers as independent contractors or pay them in cash off the books. This lowers costs by avoiding payroll taxes and unemployment insurance, and it puts compliant companies at a disadvantage when bidding on projects. Plus, misclassified workers may be denied minimum wage protections or overtime pay. Are you aware of this, and what do you think should be done about it?
If people are paying cash under the table and not doing a 1099, well, that's an enforcement issue. And if that's a problem, I'm sure the Attorney General would like to hear about those situations and Department of Revenue. I think there can be tracking available to maintain those things. But, you know, if people want to do subcontracting or be an independent contractor, you know, you don't want to force people to work the way that they don't want to work. Maybe somebody wants to start a small business with just them and they want to subcontract. You don't want to prohibit those things either.
Affordable rental housing is an issue in Wisconsin. Some have proposed government-imposed rent control to maintain affordability, while others argue keeping rent artificially low will decrease rental supply, resulting in increased prices. What is your sense of housing as an issue, and which best addresses rental housing affordability, rent control or building more rentals?
Well, it's unfortunate that that's out in the ether now about rent controls. All you have to do is a case study of New York City. If you do rent controls, then no one can improve things. There's no, it messes up their cash flow in order to improve things. So to control rent, you can't build new things or renovate because it's going to be cost prohibitive and you can't generate the revenue. The answer is supply. And so you need to do things within a regulatory structure to increase that supply. What I do come to understand a little bit more is that much of the things that are being constructed nowadays on the housing side oftentimes gets gobbled up by corporate interests as an investment, and they kind of languish empty. And how does that really help anything? I think that's a struggle that we are going to have ongoing. How do you tell someone not that they can't buy something as an investment?
What's the role for the legislature in increasing affordable supply?
I think it has a lot to do with, for instance, in Marinette, I think they probably have a need for some additional housing to satisfy some of their port activities. But in order to incorporate some of the development costs related there, the sewer, streets and all those things, it kind of deters a lot of developers from doing that. I don't know how you square that circle, because you do need streets and you do need a sewer, and you don't want to make other residents pay for that just so somebody can get a opportunity for a home ownership there. But something has to bend, I think. I think over the course of time, supply is going to catch up with that demand, and then prices will kind of stabilize or go down because there will be more available housing. With the increased supply, then the investment side of things won't be so attractive to those corporate investors, I suppose. And then those those people who want to make things a primary residence might actually come up with a good deal on a house. But for now, I think we just kind of make housing as attractive as it can to build to increase that supply chain. I think there's a lot of ideas out there that might be viable, but an ongoing problem nonetheless.
Healthcare, speaking of ongoing problems, medical systems are facing numerous headwinds in the form of inflation, workforce development, and issues around Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, resulting in fewer services and even the closure of a hospital system in western Wisconsin. What would you do to preserve access to care and prevent future closures?
You know, this really stems from a requirement in the Social Security Act that if you have an ER, that you have to take someone regardless of what they pay. And that's very good nature, and I'm not suggesting we stop doing that. The way that hospitals have reacted in recent years is to take parts of different departments, whether it's orthopedics or their heart or cancer, and put it in a separate building under a separate entity, detached from any emergency room. And therefore, they can become a viable thing on their own. In western Wisconsin, it's my current understanding, I suppose, the best I can with the available information, is that one of the few things was the birthing center was at the hospital as well as the ER. And that structure, which was a large hospital, used to be a lot of stuff in it, most of the parts had been taken out and therefore couldn't make any money with the ER there, so it just closed, period. And I think that's a lack of planning.
Is there a legislative solution to some of these problems?
I don't know.
I think some of the hospitals would say more funding or increased Medicaid reimbursement.
Well, of course, but you could do things like a Medicaid expansion. That just changes which pocket the money comes out of. It doesn't really increase it. I think that much of what the hospitals do is profitable, and there can be a method there. But I'm frankly not in that business, and I think it's going to be really a long-term issue that we're just going to have to deal with and to avoid these crises. But perhaps there can be ways the legislature can at least get ahead of the prediction of these things, so at least in the rural areas we can do things before things shut down.
I want to ask you about abortion policy. How should Wisconsin move forward on the issue of abortion?
I think it's a misnomer. There's so much misinformation, I suppose, in the internet. Abortion is a state issue, and it always has been a state issue, and people kind of confuse that. What had happened in the Dobbs decision is that instead of the medical procedure of abortion being seen through what's called a strict scrutiny analysis, it brought it down to an analysis of all other medical procedures, which is a rational basis test. And under that new rubric, you kind of analyze whether there's a government interest or not a government interest of life, or in this case, potential life, versus the government interest to protect the right to privacy for a woman. And the issue of abortion has always been a balancing test.
What should it be in Wisconsin? I think we're currently at 20 weeks. Do you support that level? Do you think there should be a referendum?
I mean, a referendum would certainly, I think, be a good path for it. No, I'm not a medical doctor, so I don't know what the appropriate level is. My analysis of the Dobbs decision does not infer to me that the Supreme Court is going to put it at conception. There's going to be some sort of a balance in there. In the ballpark, probably of, let's say, 11 to 20 weeks, somewhere in there. I don't know what the right answer is. But it's certainly not, there's certainly something in what has happened that should not prohibit us from actually hashing this out in a civil way, understanding just the balance between right to privacy and right to life.
You talked a little bit about this transportation, about the pressing transportation needs in your district and how important these are to be addressed, and how important it is for the state to keep on schedule with reconstruction of aging interstates and significant corridors of commerce.
I think that might be one of the areas that we can agree upon with the Democrats and Republicans, is that when it comes to budget time, I think there's that uniform kind of concept that that's an important issue. However, what I've noticed on the Finance Committee is that there's a little bit of a pushback on speed. In the past, there have been major construction projects. The result of funding infrastructure projects at too great of a speed kind of has a sucking of all of the workforce into government jobs. So then when you want your driveway fixed, it's at an exorbitant cost because there's no workers left. So the DOT does put things on a schedule in order to make sure that there's some stability in the workforce, both in the public sector and the private sector. So we have to be conscious of those things. But I think that funding of infrastructure projects and paying for them with cash and not bonding in order to keep those long-term costs low is something we might have a meeting of the minds with a lot in this next budget cycle.
This is an issue you've been working on to a great degree, PFAS and water contaminants, which are a concern for a growing number of Wisconsinites, including those in your district. Do you see this as an important issue, and which I think the answer is yes, but
yeah.
how are you proposing to address it now moving forward?
You know, unfortunately things had broken down between myself and the governor's office. I really only have one request regarding it, because we can agree on what programs are appropriate and when. But it's to protect the innocent landowner. Current law does not care how you got PFAS or any contaminant in your ground. Current law only cares if one molecule is going into somebody else's land. So when the governor, for instance, put $10 million of COVID money, he still has $1.3 billion left in COVID money, he could fund all these things. He put $10 million into the well compensation program. There are 1,600 contaminated wells on French Island alone in La Crosse. So when there was all this money put into the well compensation program, a total of 26 applied statewide. And you have to ask yourself why. When the money's available for well compensation, did no one use it? And the reason is because the issue is not money alone. And just releasing funds is not going to necessarily solve things.
Do you see yourself sitting down with the governor's office?
Oh yeah, any time. And I've asked for his language at any time. What do you prefer? When you send your test results to the DNR that you have a contaminated well, that is a self-incriminating statement. So the DNR is going to make you eligible for whatever grant that they have. They're also going to send you a letter declaring you a responsible party. And when you're declared a responsible party, you're going to be on the hook for any sort of remediation costs. And you have to tell your bank that now you are the owner of a brownfield and your collateral is shot. You're going to have to tell any potential buyer that you own a contaminated property. And if they buy it, they're going to be the responsible party. So these legal questions we can solve for these innocent landowners. And I mean, the governor did express to me why he opposes helping innocent landowners, and he said because the remedy in this situation is for neighbor to sue neighbor jointly and severally against the international corporation in multi-decadal litigation. And I thought that was a horrible idea. So things fell apart, and maybe there can be a meeting of the minds this coming session. He has at least expressed once locally here that he's open to helping innocent landowners. I think we can do that without letting the point source polluters off the hook, so to speak, and punish the right people.
Final two questions for you. How would you describe the leading differences between you and your opponent?
You know, I don't see her much in the area. From what I gather from viewing her on a website is that she is motivated by a singular issue of abortion. I'm not so motivated by a singular issue. I want to make sure there's good representation and that the general interests of my constituents are served. So I think that would probably be the biggest issue, or the biggest difference.
Final question. Let's say you're reelected to the Senate and you have a magic wand you can use in the state capitol that resolves one issue in a way that brings all parties together. What would that issue be?
Yeah, it would be PFAS. To this date, the DNR spreads PFAS-laden biosolids on farm fields to the tune of 150,000 parts per trillion with 1.5 dry tons per acre. And we're talking 13,000 locations plus at hundreds of acres at each location. And to turn around and then punish those people for having a contamination in their ground after being approved for these biosolids, or if you just happen to be living next to an airport that used the firefighting foam, I think there's some real ability to have a meeting of the minds of how to address situations when people are victims of pollution, and to curtail our laws in accordance with what I think we should have a shared morality of.
Well, thank you, Senator Eric Wimberger of Green Bay, the Republican candidate for the 2nd Senate District. The election is November 5th. Senator Wimberger, thank you for talking with us.
Good to see you.
This programming is brought to you by our generous sponsors. Thank you for watching.